38, the United Nations Secretary General says that when one looks at the number of civilians killed in Israel's operation against Hamas, there is something clearly wrong. He said that it was important to make Israel understand that it's against the interests of Israel to keep on with their military strategy. We're joined by Mark Regev, a former Israeli ambassador to the UK, now a senior advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Clearly wrong. There's something clearly wrong because you're pursuing the targets of Hamas, but you're killing civilians along the way. The UN is telling you that you're doing something wrong.
Well, I think we're in conformance with all the rules of law. And I'd remind you, and at Times Radio, you covered it extensively, when the West and its Arab allies were fighting ISIS in Fallujah and in Mosul, there were difficult battles in urban centers, and there too, unfortunately, civilians were caught up in the crossfire. The assumption that you can somehow defeat an enemy without having civilian casualties is, of course, erroneous. But what is our obligation as a democratic country, like it was Britain's and the United States, is to minimize those casualties. But the assumption that you can have no civilians caught up in the crossfire, that's, of course, there's been no war like that in history.
What do you think the UN? What do you make of it when the UN makes these very serious criticisms of Israel? What's your response to the UN, I suppose?
Well, two previous Secretary Generals, both Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon, talked about the UN having an institutional bias against Israel, that there being a prejudice there. Now, they were willing to talk about that and try to deal with the issue. The current Secretary General seems to have embraced that bias. Are they not holding Israel to a standard that other countries are not held to? Once again, when the coalition, correctly, it was justified, defeated ISIS in Iraq and Syria, were there not civilian casualties? Was there not collateral damage? In fact, I've sat in meetings in my previous positions with military officers, both from the UK and from the US, and I've been told that Israel actually goes above and beyond what other Western armies do.
So you think the UN is you think the UN is biased against Israel?
I've got no doubt that that's true, and we can discuss that if you're interested. But of course it is. And once again, not Mark Regev says so. Two consecutive Secretary Generals of the organization have spoken about that publicly.
I want to talk about the Israeli government and what it intends to do in Gaza after the war, presuming the war does come to a conclusion, because various different ministers say different things. They're sometimes stamped down, they're sometimes not stamped down when they say it. Does the Israeli government accept that it can have no role in governing Gaza after the war is over?
We have no intention and no desire to rule the Gaza Strip or govern the people of Gaza.
Is that the same as saying no role in the governing of Gaza?
Well, there were examples in other parts of the Middle East, excuse me, when a war was won and then things fell apart. And we don't want that to happen in Gaza. And so we are talking about an ongoing security involvement. We don't want to see Hamas or other terrorists, after being dismantled and defeated in this operation, have time to regroup, have time to reemerge, have time to rebuild their structures. And so we are talking about an ongoing Israeli security envelope. It doesn't necessarily mean a security presence inside the Gaza Strip, but it means the ability to go in and out as it needs be to deal with a threat if it emerges.
Yoav Kish, who's the education minister, said that settlements could be rebuilt in Gaza. Is he wrong?
Yeah, no, that's not the policy of the government.
So why is he saying that then?
Maybe that's his personal opinion, but no, that's not the goal.
So there'll be no settlements in Gaza?
Correct. We took out the settlements, as you know, in 2000.
Well, exactly, but someone who's in the government saying that's still on the table. I mean, this is not a random Israeli saying that. That's someone at the government, and therefore people are suspicious that that's a view that the Israeli government holds.
But I know the Minister of Education. He's a friend, and I'm not aware that that's his opinion. I'm believing you that he's quoted as saying that, but I don't believe that's his opinion.
Well, I've seen the quote, so you shouldn't have said it if it wasn't his opinion. Meanwhile, violence in the West Bank continues and grows. Do you accept that when we think about the West Bank, there's a danger that makes Israel not look like a state defending itself, generally speaking, but it looks like an occupying force, and that affects the moral judgments of Israel? When you see violence in the West Bank, when you see settlers building settlements which they're not allowed to build, does that affect how Israel is judged morally, and should it affect that?
Well, the first thing is we have Hamas cells across the West Bank, and they, of course, want to use the crisis in Gaza as an opportunity to cause a flare-up there. And so we've been preempting, we've been arresting Hamas activists across the West Bank. And so far, the levels of violence there are I mean, any violence is not good, yes, but they're much, much, much lower. They don't even come close to what's going on in Gaza. And we want to keep it relatively quiet in the West Bank. We have no desire to see another explosion on a second front.
Before you go, Mark Regev, I just wanted your reflections on the arguments in this country. They're not important when it comes right down to it, considering what we're talking about with lives and deaths in Gaza, what happened in Israel on October 7th. But it is something that has come out of that. Having lots of arguments in this country about pro-Palestinian protests taking place on Armistice Day on Saturday. How do you react when you hear about that argument?
So I should say, out of internal British arguments, I can only say the following: that so-called friends of the Palestinians should actually, I believe, be supporting us, because we will remove Hamas from office. We will remove them from power. And in so doing, we're saving Gaza from this terrible Hamas regime that's been there for 16 years. And what have they brought the Palestinians of Gaza? Impoverishment, pain, suffering, bloodshed. Surely the people of Gaza deserve a better government than the one they've currently got.
But to get the better government, you're going to cause pain, impoverishment and bloodshed. People are dying, buildings are being razed. That's the problem, isn't it? That you might be going after Hamas, but you're harming other people. And we talk about that all the time with you, Mark. I understand your argument about collateral damage. But the point is, what the UN is saying, what many observers say, it is disproportionate. You want to go after Hamas, that's understandable. Too many people are dying in your attempt to do so.
Well, we could have that discussion again and make comparisons with what the West did in Mosul and Fallujah, if you like. But I'd argue the following: if we don't finish the job, if we leave Hamas in power, its military terror machine intact, then you're just going to have more and more violence down the road. It's crucial that we finish the job. That's good for Israel by protecting our people. They don't have to live in fear of terrorists crossing the frontier and butchering their children in the middle of the night. But it's also good for the people of Gaza. A different government for them will give them stability, will give them security, and hopefully a chance for a better future. Hamas is the fierce and violent enemy of anyone who wants to see peace in the Middle East. That has to be understood.
Mark Regev, thank you for talking to us today.
My pleasure.
That's Mark Regev, their senior advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu. There might be some security involvement by Israel in Gaza after the war, but no government, he was saying.
8:46. Let's find out a bit more about Suella Braverman's position this morning with Times Radio's political editor, Kate McCann. So she's written this piece